Hey there, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a question I think we've all pondered at some point. Why do some projects just soar to success,
Right.
while others just completely crash and burn? We're talking everything from that kitchen remodel you've been dreaming of to landing a rover on Mars, like the whole
Well,
spectrum,
you hit the nail on the head.
right?
They were diving deep into how big things get done by Bent Flyvbjerg and Dan Gardner.
Okay.
They've analyzed a whopping 16,000 projects worldwide, and let me tell you, their findings are pretty eye-opening.
I bet. So I've started reading the book, and one of the first things that grabbed me was this iron law of mega projects.
Great.
It paints a pretty bleak picture, right?
Right.
Are most projects really just destined to go over budget-missed deadlines and underdeliver?
It's definitely a sobering reality check.
Yeah.
Their data shows that only 8.5% of projects finish on time and within budget.
Wow.
And get this, a mere 0.5% achieve those targets and deliver what they promised.
Oh my God.
So yes, you could say there's a pattern of things not going according to plan.
0.5%. That's a pretty scary statistic. I'm starting to think I should just abandon all my ambitious plans and stick to, simple things, like
Right.
maybe just rearranging my sock drawer.
Hold on. Before you give up on all your dreams,
Okay.
the good news is that the book doesn't just point out the problems.
Okay.
It offers solutions.
Oh, good.
And one of the biggest takeaways is that a lot of these issues stem from what they call the commitment fallacy.
The commitment fallacy. Okay, tell me more about that. I have a feeling I've fallen victim to this more than once.
It's that all too human tendency to rush into things head first without really thinking them through. Like, remember when you decided to reorganize your entire closet on a Saturday afternoon, expecting it to be done in a couple of hours?
Oh, don't remind me. I pulled everything out, made a huge mess, and ended up ordering takeout because I was too exhausted to cook.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty harmless example.
Right.
But imagine that same impulsive energy applied to, say, designing the Pentagon.
Wait, are you telling me there's a Pentagon planning fiasco linked to this commitment fallacy thing?
You bet.
Yeah.
They were so focused on getting the project moving that they almost built the Pentagon smack dab in the middle of the most scenic view from Arlington National Cemetery.
Seriously?
Yeah.
You're kidding, right? Blocking the view from Arlington National Cemetery?
Yeah.
That seems like a pretty major oversight.
It is. Luckily, someone raised a red flag before it was too late.
Okay.
But it perfectly illustrates how this rush to commit can lead to overlooking crucial details.
Right.
And it's not just about physical locations. It's about really digging into the needs, the risks, and the potential consequences of any project before you dive in.
Okay, so rushing in is a big no-no. The book emphasizes this think slow, act fast approach. I love that concept.
Yeah.
It sounds like something I could put on a motivational poster.
It's more than just a catchy phrase, though.
Okay.
It's a mindset shift. Think slow means investing the time up front to define your goals, research your options, and anticipate potential roadblocks. It's like laying a solid foundation before you start building.
So it's about doing the groundwork, even if it feels a bit slow at first. I can see how that would prevent a lot of headaches down the line.
Exactly. Then once you've got a solid plan, that's when you act fast. You move decisively,
Right.
execute efficiently, and avoid getting bogged down in endless revisions or second guessing.
This reminds me of that example in the book about the Brooklyn brownstone renovation. The couple started with just wanting to update their kitchen, but it turned into this nightmare, right?
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah.
a classic scope creep situation. They kept adding on little things, new bathroom here, a bigger deck there.
Yeah.
And before they knew it, their simple renovation had ballooned into this massive budget-busting ordeal.
Yeah, I bet they wish they had done a bit more think slow before they started swinging hammers.
Absolutely. And it's a trap that's easy to fall into.
Yeah.
Whether you're planning a wedding, starting a business, or writing a book, having that clear vision and scope from the outset can save you a ton of time, money, and stress.
So true. Okay, so we've established that rushing into things is a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
But let's get a bit more into the human side of this. Why are we so prone to making these mistakes?
Okay.
Is it just our love of instant gratification?
Well, it goes deeper than that. Our brains are hardwired for optimism and a touch of overconfidence.
Okay.
Those traits can be great for motivation, but not so much for accurate planning. Plus, we have this pesky thing called the planning fallacy to contend with.
The planning fallacy, that sounds vaguely familiar. Is that the one where I convince myself I can totally clean my entire apartment in one afternoon, but then 3 days later I'm still surrounded by piles of clothes and unopened boxes?
You nailed it.
Okay.
We consistently underestimate how long things will take and overestimate our own abilities.
Right.
And it's not just us mere mortals. This plays out in huge multi-billion-dollar projects, too.
Yeah.
Like, think about those massive infrastructure projects that drag on for years and years, costing way more than initially projected.
So it's not just about being a little too optimistic about our own abilities. Are you saying there's sometimes a more calculated element to these underestimations?
That's where strategic misrepresentation comes in.
Yes.
Think of it as the dark side of the planning fallacy. It's when people deliberately downplay costs and timelines to make a project more appealing,
Right.
to get it greenlit.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not just innocent optimism. It's sometimes a deliberate tactic. Like that example they give in the book about the mayor of Montreal in the 1976 Olympics.
That's a perfect illustration.
Yeah.
He famously claimed the Olympics would never go over budget, even comparing it to a man having a baby.
Wow.
But guess what? Montreal ended up drowning in debt for decades.
Wow, that's a cautionary tale if I've ever heard one. So we need to be wary of both our own biases and the potential for others to, let's say, bend the truth a little to get their way.
Absolutely.
Right.
How big things get done is a real eye-opener in that sense.
Yeah.
It teaches you to read between the lines, to question those rosy projections, and to do your own due diligence before jumping on board with any project, big or small.
Okay, so far we've covered the commitment fallacy, our tendency to be overly optimistic, and the potential for, shall we say, creative accounting when it comes to project planning.
Right.
But what can we actually do to avoid falling into these traps? Are there any proven strategies to help us make smarter decisions?
One of the most fascinating strategies they highlight is what they call Pixar planning. You know, like Pixar,
Yeah.
the animation studio.
Oh, yeah, I love Pixar movies. Wait, what does making animated movies have to do with, say, building a bridge or launching a new product?
It's about their process.
Yeah.
Pixar is known for their meticulous planning
Okay.
and their willingness to spend years in development,
Yeah.
iterating and refining their stories before they even start the expensive animation process.
Right.
They simulate, they test, they get feedback, and they're not afraid to go back to the drawing board if something isn't working.
So it's like that saying, measure twice, cut once. Take the time to get it right on the front end to avoid costly mistakes down the line.
Exactly. And they emphasize that this principle applies to all sorts of projects,
Okay.
not just animated films. You can see this meticulous planning in action in companies like Boeing and Apple, both known for delivering innovative products on tight schedules.
So it's not just about planning in a vacuum. It's about learning from the best and adapting those principles to our own projects. And speaking of learning from the best, the book also talks about this concept of reference class forecasting.
Yes.
Okay.
That's one of the most powerful tools for avoiding those overly optimistic projections and grounding our predictions in reality.
Okay, I have to admit that one sounds a little intimidating. Can you break it down for me? What exactly is reference class forecasting and how can we use it in our everyday lives?
It's actually simpler than it sounds.
Okay.
Instead of relying on gut feelings or wishful thinking, you look at similar past projects,
Okay.
what they call the reference class, to get a more realistic sense of what your project might entail.
So it's like looking for patterns in history. Like if I'm planning a big event, instead of just assuming everything will go smoothly, I should look at how similar events have played out in the past.
That's the idea.
Okay.
You're essentially tapping into the collective wisdom of experience.
Right.
And you're specifically looking for the outside view, meaning you're not just focusing on the unique aspects of your situation, but you're looking at what actually happened in similar situations, not just what you hope will happen this time.
It's like that saying, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
Yes.
We tend to think our project is special and unique, but chances are there are valuable lessons to be learned from those who have gone before us.
Exactly. And the book gives a great example of this with the Great Belt Project in Denmark.
The Great Belt Project. Refresh my memory. What was that about?
It was this huge infrastructure project involving building a bridge and an undersea tunnel.
Okay.
Ambitious, to say the least.
I can imagine.
And as you might have guessed, things didn't exactly go swimmingly.
So what happened? Did they hit some unexpected snags?
Snags. They hit a whole iceberg.
Oh, no.
They had delays with their tunnel boring machines, unexpected geological challenges.
Wow.
The list goes on. And when Bent Flyvbjerg, one of the authors, started digging into the project data, he discovered that the initial cost estimates were laughably optimistic.
I can imagine that didn't go too well with the folks in charge. Did they try to sweep his findings under the rug?
You bet they did. They were pretty resistant to his analysis at first.
Yeah.
But when Flyvbjerg dug deeper, he found this pattern of cost underestimation that was consistent across a whole range of projects.
Oh.
And this was the seed of what would become his extensive research on the iron law of megaprojects.
So this seemingly isolated case in Denmark actually opened up this whole new way of looking at project management.
That's the beauty of being willing to challenge assumptions and dig deeper into the data. Sometimes a single project can reveal patterns and insights that have far-reaching implications.
Okay, we've talked about the dangers of rushing in the power of think slow, act fast, and the importance of learning from past projects through reference class forecasting. But what happens when things inevitably go off the rails? How do people and organizations react when they realize they're headed for disaster?
Well, it's not always pretty. One of the most common responses is something psychologists call escalation of commitment.
Escalation of commitment.
That sounds intense.
What does that look like in practice?
It's basically doubling down on a failing course of action, even when all signs point to disaster.
Oh.
And it's closely tied to the sunk cost fallacy, that feeling that we can't abandon something we've already invested so much in,
Right.
even if it's no longer rational to continue.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. It's like when you keep putting money into an old car that's constantly breaking down just because you've already spent so much on repairs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Flyvbjerg and Gardner argue that this plays a huge role in why projects spiral out of control in terms of budget and timelines.
Yeah.
They become these black holes of investment, sucking in more and more resources in a desperate attempt to salvage something that's probably doomed.
And they use the Boston Big Dig as a prime example, right? That massive highway project that seemed to drag on forever and cost way more than anyone imagined.
The Big Dig is a poster child for escalation of commitment.
Yeah.
They kept running into problems, costs were skyrocketing.
Yeah.
But there was so much political pressure to keep going.
Right.
They just dug themselves deeper and deeper into a hole. And it's not just government projects. They also talk about the Concorde supersonic jet, this technological marvel that became a commercial flop.
Yeah, the Concorde, that was a case of national pride getting in the way of sound decision-making, right?
Exactly. Governments can get caught up in this cycle of escalation just as easily as individuals.
Wow.
They poured money into Concorde even when it became clear it was a financial disaster,
Yeah.
all because they couldn't admit defeat. It became more about saving face than making sensible choices.
So it's not just about making smart plans, it's about having the courage to cut your losses and pivot when necessary, and recognizing that sometimes it's okay to walk away.
Exactly. Understanding this psychological tendency is crucial if we want to make better decisions about our projects.
Right.
And how big things get done gives us the tools to recognize these patterns and to make more rational choices, whether dealing with a multi-million-dollar project or just trying to decide whether to finally get rid of that old clunker in the garage.
I like that analogy.
It's like sometimes we get so attached to an idea or an investment that we lose sight of the bigger picture. We keep throwing resources at a problem, hoping for a miracle, instead of stepping back and reassessing.
Yeah, I think that's a trap a lot of us fall into, not just with, big projects, but also with smaller things in our lives, relationships, careers, even hobbies. Sometimes it takes a lot of courage to admit when something isn't working and to move on.
You're absolutely right. And the book makes a really compelling case for building that kind of flexibility and adaptability into our approach to projects from the very beginning. Because let's face it, things rarely go exactly as planned.
Okay, so far we've talked a lot about what can go wrong. The commitment fallacy, our tendency to be overly optimistic, and the danger of escalating our commitment to failing courses of action. It's starting to feel like a recipe for pessimism, but I know how big things get done isn't all doom and gloom. What about the success stories? Are there any projects that have managed to beat the odds and actually come out on top?
There are, and they offer some really valuable lessons. One of my favorite examples is the story of the Empire State Building. Talk about an iconic project.
The Empire State Building, that's a classic. I've always been fascinated by that building. What makes its story a success story in terms of project management?
Well, for starters, it was built in record time, just over a year, and it came in under budget.
Wait, under budget. Now that's something you don't hear every day, especially when it comes to massive construction projects. What was their secret?
Meticulous planning, for one. They had a crystal clear vision for what they wanted to achieve, and they developed a detailed plan for how to get there.
So it sounds like they really embraced that think slow part of the equation. Did they assemble some kind of dream team to make it happen?
They did. They brought together the best architects, engineers, and construction workers.
Yeah.
And they emphasized collaboration and coordination from day one.
I've read that they even used a kind of assembly line approach to construction, right? Like having different teams working on different floors simultaneously.
Yeah.
Which allowed them to build upwards much faster.
That's right. They took inspiration from the efficiency of factories, which was pretty innovative for the time. And the result was not only a beautiful and iconic building, but also a project that defied the iron law. It was completed on time and under budget, proving that careful planning and execution can lead to remarkable results.
So the Empire State Building is a great example of how think slow, act fast can actually work in practice. It's not just a theoretical concept, it's a proven strategy. And I think it's really inspiring to see that even in the 1930s, they were able to achieve that level of efficiency and coordination.
It's a testament to what's possible when you combine a clear vision with meticulous planning and a talented collaborative team.
And they contrast the Empire State Building with the Sydney Opera House, right?
Oh, yes. The Sydney Opera House is almost the anti-Empire State Building.
Oh.
It's a case of what not to do when it comes to project management.
I mean, it's an architectural masterpiece. Those iconic sails are incredible. But I've heard that the project was plagued with problems.
It's a classic example of ambition exceeding execution.
Yeah.
They have this incredibly bold design,
Yeah.
but they underestimated the complexity of the project and they didn't have a solid plan for how to bring it to life.
So they basically jumped into the act fast part without doing enough think slow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they paid the price. The project dragged on for over a decade, costing far more than initially projected, and it became embroiled in political controversies.
It's a reminder that even the most beautiful and ambitious projects can run aground if you don't have the right planning and execution in place.
It's a valuable lesson for all of us. It's not just about having a great idea, it's about having the discipline and the foresight to translate that idea into a well-managed project.
Okay, we've talked about learning from past projects, both successes and failures, but how do we actually go about doing that? Is it simply a matter of reading case studies and trying to identify best practices?
It's more than just mimicking what others have done. Each project is unique, so we need to be careful about drawing overly simplistic conclusions.
So we can't just copy and paste what worked in one situation and expect it to automatically work in another. We need to be more nuanced in our approach.
Exactly. And this is where that reference class forecasting idea comes in handy again.
Yeah.
It's about finding the right reference class projects that are truly similar to ours in terms of scope, complexity, and risk, and then using that data to inform our predictions.
So it's not just about finding any old project that seems vaguely similar. It's about doing the research to find the most relevant comparisons and to understand the underlying dynamics that led to success or failure.
And they emphasize that this process can be quite challenging, especially when it comes to complex and innovative projects. You might not have a lot of historical data to work with, and you might have to make some educated guesses.
It's like that famous Donald Rumsfeld quote about known unknowns and unknown unknowns. We need to be aware of the things we know we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And we also need to be prepared for the things we don't even realize we don't know.
Exactly. And this is where involving a diverse range of perspectives in the planning process can be incredibly valuable. You need people who can bring different kinds of knowledge and experience to the table so you can hopefully anticipate a wider range of potential challenges.
So it's not just about having the right technical expertise. It's also about having people who can think creatively and challenge assumptions.
Absolutely. And this is where the concept of outside view thinking becomes really important.
Yeah.
It's about stepping outside of your own perspective and your own assumptions and trying to see the project through the eyes of others.
It's like seeking out those dissenting voices, those who might see things that you're missing.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes the people who are closest to a project can become too invested in a particular outcome, and they might not be able to see the potential pitfalls.
You're exactly right. It's about creating a culture where constructive criticism is welcomed and where people feel comfortable speaking up when they see something that's not quite right.
Okay, so far we've talked about the importance of planning, learning from experience, and avoiding common psychological biases. But what about the execution phase? Once the plan is in place, what are some key factors that determine whether a project will actually succeed?
Well, one of the most crucial factors is having a strong and cohesive team. It's like that old saying, there's no I in team. You need a group of people who are not only talented and skilled,
Right.
but also able to work together effectively.
Because even with the best plan in the world, if you don't have the right people to execute it, you're going to run into problems.
And the book highlights the importance of fostering a culture of collaboration and communication,
Right.
making sure everyone is on the same page, working towards a common goal, and feeling empowered to contribute their ideas.
So it's not just about assembling a group of superstars. It's about creating an environment where they can thrive as a team.
And they give a fascinating example of this in the book with the Manhattan Project, a massive effort to develop the atomic bomb during World War II.
Wow, the Manhattan Project. That was a truly extraordinary undertaking involving thousands of scientists, engineers, and military personnel, all working under incredible pressure.
And they managed to achieve their goal in just a few years, which is astonishing.
So, what were some of the key factors that contributed to their success? Was it just the sheer urgency of the mission?
It was more than that. One of the key factors was their leadership. General Leslie Groves, who was in charge of the project, was an incredible organizer and a master of logistics.
So, he had the ability to bring all these different pieces together and make them work as a cohesive whole.
Exactly. And he also understood the importance of empowering his team. He gave his scientists and engineers a lot of autonomy, which allowed them to be more creative and productive.
That's an interesting point. It seems counterintuitive, but sometimes giving people more freedom can actually lead to better results.
And they also had a very clear sense of urgency. They knew that the fate of the world might depend on their success, so they were willing to work around the clock to get the job done.
So it was a combination of strong leadership, a clear and compelling goal, a talented and empowered team, and a shared sense of urgency that allowed them to overcome incredible challenges.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is that many of the principles that led to their success can be applied to projects of all sizes, even those that aren't quite as, shall we say, high stakes as developing an atomic bomb.
So it's about finding ways to translate those principles of leadership, empowerment, and urgency into our own projects, no matter what we're working on.
Exactly. And it's also about recognizing that things rarely go exactly as planned. You need to be able to adapt to changing circumstances and to make adjustments along the way.
That's where the concept of strategic agility comes in, right?
Absolutely. Strategic agility is all about being able to respond effectively to unexpected challenges and opportunities.
So it's not just about having a plan, it's about being able to adjust that plan when necessary, and even to completely change direction if the situation demands it.
Exactly. And they argue that this requires a combination of flexibility, responsiveness, and a willingness to experiment.
It's like being able to dance with the unexpected, to embrace change as an opportunity rather than a threat.
They highlight that organizations that are strategically agile tend to have several key characteristics.
Like what makes an organization truly agile?
Well, for one, they tend to have a decentralized decision-making structure.
So instead of having all the decisions made at the top, they empower people at all levels of the organization to make decisions.
Exactly. And this allows them to be much more responsive to changes in the environment.
Because they're not waiting for orders from on high, they can adapt quickly to new information and new circumstances. It's like having a network of sensors spread throughout the organization, all feeding information back to the central nervous system.
That's a great analogy. And they also tend to have a culture of experimentation.
So they're not afraid to try new things and to learn from their mistakes. Failure is seen as an opportunity for growth rather than something to be punished.
Right. They embrace the idea that you learn more from your failures than from your successes. And they're constantly looking for ways to improve, to iterate, and to innovate.
And they also tend to have a strong focus on customer needs, right?
Yes. They're obsessed with understanding their customers, with getting feedback, and with making sure their products and services are meeting those needs.
So strategic agility is not just about being flexible and responsive, it's also about being customer-centric. It's about putting the customer at the heart of everything you do.
Exactly. And the book provides some really inspiring examples of organizations that have successfully embraced strategic agility, like Amazon, Google, and Netflix.
Those are all companies that have been incredibly successful at adapting to changing market conditions and innovating at a rapid pace.
And they all share those key characteristics of decentralized decision-making, a culture of experimentation, and a strong customer focus. It's a powerful combination.
It seems like strategic agility is no longer a nice to have. It's essential for survival in today's fast-paced and unpredictable world.
It's becoming the defining characteristic of successful organizations. Those who can embrace change, experiment fearlessly, and stay close to their customers will thrive, while those who cling to rigid structures and outdated approaches will struggle to keep up.
Okay, so we've talked about the practical side of project management, the planning, the execution, the importance of adaptability and agility. But how big things get done also delves into a really interesting and important topic, the ethical dimensions of project management.
That's right. They make a compelling case that project management isn't just about technical skills and processes. It's also about making ethical decisions that take into account the broader impact of our work.
Because projects, especially large-scale ones, can have a ripple effect that goes far beyond the immediate stakeholders.
Exactly. They can impact communities, the environment, even future generations. And it's crucial for project managers to consider those implications when making decisions.
They highlight the case of the Three Gorges Dam in China, which was a massive engineering project that displaced millions of people and had a significant environmental impact.
That's a powerful example of how even projects that are designed to benefit society can have unintended consequences. And it raises important questions about the trade-offs between economic development and social and environmental sustainability.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always linear, and that sometimes the most ambitious projects can come at a high cost.
And they argue that project managers have a responsibility to grapple with these ethical dilemmas and to make decisions that are in the best interests of all stakeholders, not just those who stand to benefit financially.
So it's not just about getting the job done, it's about doing the right thing, even when it's difficult or unpopular.
And they offer some valuable frameworks for thinking about ethical decision-making in project management.
Like, what are some tools we can use to navigate these ethical complexities?
Well, one framework they suggest is this stakeholder analysis, where you identify all the different groups of people who are affected by a project
Okay.
and consider their interests and perspectives.
So it's about taking a wider view and recognizing that there are multiple perspectives that need to be taken into account.
Right. And another framework they recommend is the cost-benefit analysis, where you weigh the potential benefits of a project against its potential costs, including not just financial costs, but also social and environmental costs.
So it's about taking a more holistic view, considering all the potential impacts of a project, both positive and negative.
Exactly. And they also emphasize the importance of transparency and accountability.
Being open and honest about the risks and challenges of a project and being willing to take responsibility for your decisions.
Right. And they make a really interesting point that ethical project management isn't just the right thing to do, it's also good for business.
Because it builds trust with stakeholders and it can help to avoid costly mistakes and scandals.
Right. So by embracing ethical principles, project managers can not only create more successful projects, but also contribute to a more just and sustainable world.
So it's about seeing ethics not as constraint, but as an opportunity to create more positive and impactful outcome.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that project management isn't just about technical skills. It's about leadership, about vision, and about making decisions that create a better future for everyone.
It's inspiring to think that even in the face of immense complexity and uncertainty, we can still find ways to make progress and to create a better future. And speaking of complexity, there's one more concept from the book that I found particularly fascinating, this idea of modularity.
Ah, modularity. That's a real game changer when it comes to managing complex projects and systems.
I have to admit, when I first saw that word, I thought of those modular furniture systems you can buy at IKEA.
Right.
But I'm guessing it has a much broader application in the context of how big things get done.
You're right. It goes way beyond assembling bookshelves. It's a powerful design principle that can be applied to everything from airplanes to software to energy systems.
Okay, so what exactly is modularity and why is it so important for project management?
Think of it like building with Lego blocks. Instead of creating a monolithic structure where everything is interconnected, you break down a project into smaller, self-contained units or modules. Each module can be designed, built, and tested independently, and then assembled into a larger whole.
I'm starting to see the appeal. By working on smaller, more manageable pieces, you reduce the overall complexity of the project, right?
Exactly. And that can have huge benefits in terms of cost, speed, and quality.
So you're saying that breaking things down into smaller chunks can actually make things go faster and smoother?
It might seem counterintuitive, but yes. And how big things get done gives a great example of this with the Airbus A380, which is a massive airplane, one of the largest passenger jets in the world.
The A380, that's a huge undertaking involving thousands of parts and people from all over the world. How did they manage to pull that off?
Modularity played a key role.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of building the entire aircraft as one giant interconnected system, they designed it as a series of modules. Each module could be built and tested separately, often in different countries, and then shipped to the final assembly line.
So it was like a giant jigsaw puzzle where all the pieces were built independently and then fitted together.
Exactly. And that allowed them to achieve a level of complexity and sophistication that would have been impossible with a more traditional approach. They could work in parallel test and refine each module independently and ultimately integrate the different pieces more efficiently.
So modularity isn't just for giant airplanes. The book also talks about its application in other areas like housing, right?
That's right. They give the example of modular housing, where homes are built off-site in factories as prefabricated units and then shipped to the building site to be assembled.
That's interesting. I've seen some really innovative modular homes that are incredibly stylish and energy efficient. So you're reducing waste, improving quality control, and potentially even lowering costs by building in a factory setting.
Exactly. And they also discuss how modularity is transforming the energy industry. Think about the rise of modular solar and wind farms. Instead of building massive centralized power plants, we can now create a distributed network of smaller, more flexible energy sources.
So you're spreading the risk, so to speak. If one module fails, the entire system doesn't go down. Plus, you can scale up more easily, adding more modules as needed.
You got it. Modularity brings resilience and adaptability to the energy grid, which is essential as we transition to a more sustainable future.
So modularity isn't just a design principle. It's a way of thinking about systems that can lead to greater efficiency, resilience, and adaptability.
It's a powerful idea that can be applied to all sorts of challenges, from managing complex projects to tackling global issues like climate change.
Speaking of which, I was really struck by how big things get done connects modularity to the challenge of addressing climate change.
It's a fascinating connection. They argue that modularity is essential to developing and deploying clean energy solutions at the scale we need to make a real impact.
So instead of trying to solve the problem with a few giant centralized projects, we need to think in terms of a more distributed and modular approach.
Exactly. We need to break down the problem into smaller, more manageable pieces, creating a network of interconnected solutions that can be scaled up rapidly and adapted to different local conditions.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like the old adage, think globally, act locally, but applied to the challenge of creating a more sustainable world.
And modularity allows us to tap into the power of innovation and entrepreneurship because it creates opportunities for smaller companies and communities to develop and deploy their own solutions.
So it's not just about big government programs or massive corporations leading the way. It's about empowering everyone to be part of the solution.
Exactly. It's a more democratic and more resilient approach to tackling this complex global challenge.
Wow, this deep dive into how big things get done has been incredible. We've explored so many fascinating ideas, from the iron law of mega projects to the power of think slow, act fast, to the importance of ethical decision making and the potential of modularity.
It's been a real journey of discovery, and I think we've both learned a lot about the art and science of making things happen in the world.
I know I have. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that while the odds might be stacked against us, we're not powerless. By understanding the forces at play, by learning from the past, and by embracing the principles of thoughtful planning, collaborative execution, and strategic agility, we can increase our chances of success.
And we can also find ways to make a positive impact on the world, whether we're building bridges, launching businesses, or simply trying to live more fulfilling lives.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, we encourage you to embrace the think slow, act fast mindset, to challenge your assumptions, and to never stop learning and growing. And as you embark on your own projects, big or small, remember the wise words of Bent Flyvbjerg and Dan Gardner. Their insights can help you navigate the complexities of the modern world and achieve your goals while also making the world a better place.
How big things get done is a call to action, a reminder that we all have the power to shape our own destiny and to create a more positive future.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you found it as insightful and inspiring as we did. And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.